Today, we're joined by Mike Schiller, former Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer at Texas Instruments. He is the president of Onward Consulting and has more than 30 years of Fortune 500 experience in information security, technology, and audit. He is also the author of IT Auditing and his latest book, High Impact at Low Decibels. In this episode, we talk about leadership, cybersecurity program priorities, and most importantly, how we can nourish, support, and mentor our CISOs.
Every business has risk. The real challenge is keeping up with it. That's where C1 Risk makes a difference. It's an all-in-one platform that brings governance, risk, and compliance together in one place. You can automate tasks, monitor and mitigate risks in real time, and tap into more than 200 compliance frameworks with intelligent control mapping. And because it integrates seamlessly with the tools companies already use, it helps reduce cost, improve efficiency, and keep teams focused on what matters most. To learn more or request a free demo, go to c1risk.com.
Hi, Mike. Thank you so much for joining me today. It was great reconnecting with you not too long ago in Dallas, and I've been looking forward to this conversation ever since. But before we get started, I just want to give the audience a little background of why I'm so excited about this. As I reflect on my own cybersecurity career, you're one of those leaders who has made an impact on me. I'm a strong advocate for having mentors at every stage of anyone's career. And I think that Texas Instruments and having the amazing opportunity to grow up in that environment have truly shown me that. And I truly believe without people like you investing in me, I wouldn't be where I am today. So I'm so thankful that you're joining us and sharing your journey. And, for all of our audience on this podcast who haven't had the fortune of meeting you, can you give us a little background about your career journey and some of the key experiences that shaped you to become a Fortune 500 CISO cybersecurity leader?
Oh, sure. Thanks, Lily. I really appreciate you saying all that. I'm really excited to be here, and I share those fond memories of our time working together, and we learned from each other. And, working with you all those years ago at Texas Instruments, it was always clear to me you were going to do big things, but my goodness, I am so impressed with all the things you have accomplished in your career. So anyway, the feelings are mutual. Thank you. The question you asked about my career, I think I probably had a little bit of a fairly non-traditional route to being a CISO. Feel like I talked with so many of my peers in the CISO community, and it feels like most of them are like professional CISOs. So they're a CISO at multiple companies, and they're just really good at being a CISO. Whereas I became a CISO in the company where I grew up, and then I stayed there. And when I look back at my career path, I think it just kind of perfectly was set up to lead me there because I had this combination of internal audit and IT operations experience. I basically went from IT to internal audit, back to IT, and then to the CISO role. I started as an individual contributor, like an IT developer, but then I moved into our internal audit department as an IT auditor. Did that for a lot of years, then moved into leadership within the IT audit organization as the IT audit director for a lot of years. Then decided to move back into IT, leading various operations organizations. So I led various functions from infrastructure to application development and support, et cetera, and eventually got promoted to the executive level of reporting to the CIO. And then we had an opening for a CISO, and I was just sort of perfectly set up to move into that role because I had that audit, governance, information security background from my time working in IT audit and leading that organization. But then I had all this IT operations background, so could really understand the operational impact of security. So, and I was already a leader at that level, so kind of already had that credibility in those relationships. So it was just kind of a perfect combination of things where I was a good fit, and then that was the most rewarding role I had during my career. I did that for the last 8 years I was at the company, and I really do think having an operations experience helped me be a better CISO because I had a feel for the impact of our security program, policies, controls, how that was going to actually impact operations and knowledge of who to go to and how systems have evolved, et cetera. And so I think all of that just helped me be more effective.
Absolutely. And, as I hear you go from an IT developer where you started into an audit function, which is a total different type of role, right? Like the developer role is, you're basically on a terminal building applications, building systems to an IT audit role where you're really looking at like standards and best practices and governance. Like, how was that transition like? And also the transition from being an individual contributor to manage.
Yeah. So the transition from operations and IT to IT audit, as an individual contributor, it was yeah, the whole Venn diagram concept, right? You always want it when you move from one thing to another, you want to make sure you've got some overlap. So they really needed some people who understood the technology. They were kind of building their IT audit team at the time at the company. And I brought that. What I didn't have was any knowledge of internal controls and things like that. And then they taught me that. That's where my training was. So I brought, one piece of knowledge that was needed for the company in that role. And then I got trained on the rest of it. Unfortunately, the whole concept of internal controls and auditing and documenting work papers, it just all clicked with me. It just happened to fit my personality. I think, it's interesting when you ask about the moving from individual contributor to leadership. First off, uh, that ended up being what I did for the rest of my career, right? I was a leader, but then I led all these different organizations, and probably the thing that I think about as a big aha moment for me in my leadership career was actually when I moved from leading IT audit to leading other IT organizations, because that's when I had to really learn what is leadership all about. Because when I was leading the IT audit organization, I I was a subject matter expert, right? I could tell people how to do their jobs. I knew the details of the work. Now I had to learn how to be an effective leader, but again, going back to the Venn diagram, okay, so I had this knowledge of the subject matter, but I had to learn how to be a leader. So there was some growth there. But then I moved into leading an organization where people were doing something I had no idea how to do, right? They were, developing and supporting systems written in a language I had never written. I couldn't tell them how to do their job, and so I really had a struggle on what what was my value add, right? What was I actually bringing to the organization? And go ahead.
Actually, I was gonna say that could be really a deep question because from my experience, everyone I used to work with at Texas Instruments were deeply technical.
Right, right, yeah, and so I actually came close to leaving the company and going to another company to lead IT audit again, just because I was struggling with, am I really adding value here? Because again, I can't tell these guys how to do their job. And fortunately, before I took that leap, I got some really timely feedback about where I was adding value, and it really shifted my thought process and understanding of where I can where I can benefit the organization, and understanding that, the whole "what got you here won't get you there" is that I don't need to know how to do everyone's job, right? That's why they're there. It's the whole concept of you get good people and you point in the right direction, get out of their way. And I came to realize that my value add was in 3 areas that I needed to be really good at, and they happen to all start with P, so it becomes very alliterative. But, one is priorities, right? My job is to set the priorities so we as an organization know what direction we're marching in. The second is processes, right? I have to make sure we have solid processes so that we can make sure we're executing our responsibilities effectively and efficiently. And then
Mhm.
3, people, right? Both the team reporting to me, which is about culture and coaching and, being a good leader to the team that's reporting to me, as well as to stakeholders, right? Building strong relationships with our stakeholders and understanding their priorities so we know we're working on the right things. And that experience of going from leading something where I was an expert to going and leading things that I couldn't do the individual contributors' work forced me to really re-examine what is my value add as a leader, and then I became very passionate about that and what value a good leader can provide to an organization.
That is amazing, and just, like, hearing how concise you're able to even, like, articulate this really shows that you mastered the skill, and I'm very curious, like, the the person who gave you these feedback or the people who gave you these feedback, were they people who reported to you or people that have, like, supported you in your career in terms of helping you really understand these, like, niche and these skills that you have and the value that you add to the team?
Well, it was actually a very, specific circumstance where there was a request for me to move and lead a different organization because that organization was having some struggles and really needed some help from a culture standpoint, morale standpoint, and leadership came to me and they said, "Oh yeah, you've got this reputation of being somebody who creates or not creates, but leads high performing teams that have really strong morale, really good culture." And I was like, "Oh, I didn't even realize that that was a perception of me, right?" And that's what really caused me to sit back and think, "Oh, well, maybe I am adding value. Maybe I am doing some good, even though I can't tell the team how to do their job."
Mhm. That is actually, I think what I'm hearing is kinda incredible because you were demonstrating, your value without knowing without being able to describe it and knowing that was your brand that other people recognized of you.
Right, it was definitely an aha moment for me as a leader, and again, and I became very passionate that this is very meaningful because, again, as my leadership, journey, for lack of a better word, progressed over the decades, I became very passionate about the fact that leadership is a tremendous responsibility, right? Once you're a leader, it's no longer about you, it's about the team, and you're the single biggest influence on whether someone's job is a pleasure or a burden, right? And again, being a leader that is really intentional about culture and putting people in a position to succeed and coaching them, helping them be their best selves, that is tremendously valuable and meaningful to people, as well as the organization, obviously.
And that's amazing. And before we talk about the way you built your team and getting to high performing team and what that means, I would like to know, and I'm incredibly curious about your training to, like grow as a leader.
That's something that, I was fortunate to work at a really good company that really invested in people. So, yeah, absolutely. You know, they supported me with, just kind of your standard leadership training classes, as well as some of those where you go and get kind of individually assessed and get feedback. So I had some of those training, but honestly, nothing is better than learning from strong leaders and observing strong leaders. And I was fortunate enough to work for a lot of really good leaders at the company. And so got to observe them, learn from them, and be mentored by them. And I think that was a big part of how I grew as a leader.
I I think I completely agree. I think even from my experience in my career at the short time that I was at I met some great leader who I'm still friends with today, decades later, and I feel like that trust and that really like deep understanding about those relationships are so valuable.
Yeah.
Uh, So let's talk about like we said priorities, process, and people. And I don't know if we want to break those three down, but let's talk about people in terms of like what does high performing team means and how did you design your cybersecurity team, which is the focus of our audience. They're in cybersecurity, they aspire to be CISOs. How did you recruit and how did you build and thought about designing your team?
Yeah, those are good questions. And maybe take those in turn. Let's talk about design and then talk about maybe the traits. And when I think about designing a cybersecurity team, I think our head goes straight to org chart, right? Which is probably not where our head should first go because there's how we're organized, but then there's what we do. And it's really easy to initially focus on let's create an org chart. But I think first we have to make sure we understand what do we do? And I like to call that our core services, right? What services do we provide to the company? And then how do we organize to optimize the delivery of those services? And the org chart will kind of flow from there. And the org chart over time may shift, right? You may make changes based on the leaders you have in place or synergies you see between teams or the need to really focus on one service. But everything should go back to that concept of what do we provide to the organization, to the company, and let's make sure we're providing that well. And I came up with a list of core services that I think makes sense for a security team. Somebody else could organize, someone else could come up with a different list, but I think you can break it down into 6 areas that every security organization should be providing. One is threat and vulnerability management. That's the whole concept of what do we need to be protecting ourselves from. So threat intelligence, vulnerability analysis and scanning, penetration testing, all those kinds of things would fall into that. The second would be security monitoring and incident response. So it's your SOC and looking at logs and alerts and managing security incidents and DLP and digital forensics, all that sort of thing. Third would be policy and compliance management. So that's making sure we've got the right policies at the company. So we're defining expected behaviors, making sure we know what regulations we need to be in compliance with, and then monitoring for compliance with our internal policies and those regulations. A fourth service would be like awareness and communications. So security training for the organization, phishing assessments, that sort of thing. A fifth one I kind of call security engineering, which is things like making sure we've got a roadmap for our security program, making sure we know what industry standards we want to align with, and then having a plan for driving towards that alignment. Working with IT and the businesses as they're implementing new things to consult and give input on how to do it securely, sign off if that's part of your process. And then the sixth one would be security infrastructure. That's the identity management, firewalls, network security, those sorts of things, which has a foot in operations. Sometimes it sits there, sometimes it sits in security, but regardless of where it sits organizationally, it's a critical component of the security program. So I that's where my head ended up going over time was these are really the 6 core services a security organization needs to make sure they're delivering, and let's figure out how to organize so that we do that well.
And I find it really fascinating and intriguing that you are grouping security engineering and security infrastructure instead of dividing your cybersecurity team into like identity access, incident response, business continuity, instead of like looking at it like a traditional cybersecurity domain.
Well, in some cases, and it's sometimes we organize exactly like some of those things you said. I mean, obviously having a cyber defense operations team as a standalone group, that makes a lot of sense. It's just to me, it's just more about making sure we first are all aligned on what are we doing? What is it we provide to the company? And then what organizations, what org structure is going to help us do that best. I just feel like it's frequent that we focus first and foremost on an org chart without stepping back to think, what are we trying to accomplish with this?
I think that is a really great lens. And I think the other thing I'm kind of catching is that the service that you provide and where does it make sense? And one of the things I want to get your input on is in a lot of situation, and I feel like, in the past role that I had with you guys, we did this really well where, the tool selection or the standards and the design of security infrastructure and systems was in the scope of security, but when it comes to operations, operating performance, capacity, scalability, that tends to go into IT operation. including supporting endpoints and supporting like firewalls and all that good stuff.
Yeah, that's a tricky topic, and I think every company does it differently, so I don't know there's a right answer. I personally liked the concept for those things of having a foot in operations and a foot in security because there needs to be a lot of guidance from security, right? Because these things need to be set up in a way that protects the company, and you've got your security experts that are going to, have a lot of knowledge on how to do that. On the other hand, there's a major operational impact on these things, and sometimes, someone can make a mistake, and it can shut down a manufacturing floor, and that's a big deal, and you want the full force of your operations team there to help resolve those things. So I really personally liked the idea of, I know some people don't like dual reporting, and that's fine because they think maybe that, two bosses equals no bosses or, too many chefs in the kitchen. I like that as long as, the operations director and the CISO have a healthy relationship because they each have such an important role and having that person or people leading security infrastructure who are, fully embedded in the leadership teams, uh, of both organizations, I find to be one effective way to address that. What you just talked about with there really being a foot in both camps.
Absolutely. And then I'm also in this camp as well. And I've seen security manager being very, very successful coming from IT because they do have that depth of IT operations where they also like have that really good relationship between IT and security. And I think that in a company, there are so many things that needs to be done, and there's no right or wrong answer,
Right.
but you also need to really be able to work collaboratively from a cultural perspective.
That's right. Agree. And I also agree with what you just said is on that from an organization standpoint, there's not a right or wrong answer. I've seen it be effectively done multiple ways. And it's all about the relationships of the organizations. As long as they're healthy, we'll figure out a way to make it work.
So that kind of bridges us to like people, right? Like high performing team. What does that mean? And in your 8 years as a CISO, how have you gotten there? Did you inherited a great team, or were there things that evolved because of the industry changes? Like,
Well, first off, I definitely inherited a great team. Right? So, the CISO I took over from had done a lot of great work and had hired a lot of great people. And a lot of them were there for the entire 8 years I was there. So, absolutely. But we also grew the team and brought new people in. And, if we're talking about, what are the traits of a high performing security team, I mean, we could look at angles like, the metrics and how do we measure execution and all that sort of thing, because you wanna have those things for each core service. Those are ways that you can know you're delivering what you're supposed to, but when I think about, what are some of the traits where my head goes are some of the things that over time I thought were important when building a security team again, what the characteristics of a good security team are, and I could probably think, I don't know, 4 or 5 things that, come to mind, and one is kind of related to my background that I talked about earlier, is having a good mix of people with different backgrounds, and I really think it's helpful to have some people with really strong security backgrounds, but also people with strong operations backgrounds, especially if you can bring them in from the operations teams within your company. Because, having those people with strong security backgrounds, that gives that strong foundation of security fundamentals. But if all you have are security professionals, you run the ivory tower risk, right? If you have these security folks who don't really understand how the real world works and, are maybe recommending things that aren't realistic, right? You want someone to balance that. And that's where your operations folks can do that because they understand how things work and they have credibility, they have contacts. But of course, you don't want to be all just folks with operations background because you have those people with strong understanding of security principles. So, that's one thing I think of as far as a high performance cybersecurity team. I like having that balance and kind of related to that is making sure that when we're hiring people, that we're hiring people that will be balanced in their approach. Because if I could do just a quick tangent on this topic, you know, I would sometimes teach security courses, like do lectures at local colleges and stuff. And it was always interesting to ask people, hey, what do you think the mission of the security organization is? And usually you get something, they're all valid answers, but they're like, it's about maximizing security or eliminating risks. And I always like to tell people, hey, we need to remember that ultimately the purpose of a security organization is to safely enable the business. We don't sell security, right? That's not one of our revenue generating products, right? And my company, the company we were both at, we sold semiconductors, right? So our goal is to support the business via the security program. So our goal is not to have a world-class security program. It's having a security program that enables this company to be a world-class semiconductor company. And that's an important distinction. And going back to this question of high performing security teams, I think it's important to have people that can understand the need to balance. And so sometimes the business is going to be trying to do something we might think from a security standpoint sounds crazy, but let's not just say no. Let's understand, what are you trying to accomplish? And let's see if we can find a secure way for you to accomplish that. So that's another trait. I think that kind of balanced approach. And I've hired some people that didn't fit well into that. Maybe they came from really highly regulated environments where security says jump and everyone asks how high. And they would be frustrated when they would come to a company where we were encouraging some give and take, right? So again, that's part of an important thing when hiring people. Say, hey, this is our approach. Is this something that you're going to be comfortable with? I also think passion and curiosity about security cannot be replaced. I mean, yeah, you're going to hire people because they have the technical skills you're looking for, but security is constantly changing. So I think we also have to filter around, does this person have a passion for this topic? And have they demonstrated that? Have they gotten certifications? Have they taken training on their own? Do they do reading on their own? Do they keep up with the industry? Or are they somebody who's going to be quickly left behind? And then I guess another trait of a high performing team I think of is a collaborative style, which again goes back to that whole balance thing. But and the security team needs help from everyone to be successful. It's not going to be about a big stick. It's about winning hearts and minds and partnering with the rest of IT and the businesses and that sort of thing. So we need people that are able and willing to influence without authority. So those are a few things I think of. Oh, in addition to, obviously your team needs to have rock solid integrity and work ethic because you're entrusted to protect the company. People can't be questioning our integrity and our ethics. So those are some things I think of when I think of what does a high performing cybersecurity team look like?
Absolutely. I like just keep nodding my head every time. And I'm already imagining the comments that we're gonna get from this podcast. I just love how you're able to like really articulate it so clearly.
Thank you.
The passion, the curiosity, the integrity and work ethics, trust, and also the purpose and the balance of serving the company, right?
You don't have to be the loudest person in the room to lead it. That's the idea behind High Impact at Low Decibels, the new book from Mike Schiller, a former Fortune 500 executive and self-described anxiety-filled introvert who climbed to the top of his field without changing who he is. It's practical, it's funny, and it's for anyone who's ever felt like the workplace was built for extroverts. High Impact at Low Decibels.
So with all those 6 different discipline of cybersecurity, building a cybersecurity team that you talked about, I'm curious, like, where do you think from a management perspective, like, had like was more difficult to manage? Because, you know, like sometimes when I think about all the different disciplines of cybersecurity, I think about like the threat and vulnerability is very black and white, right? Like you either have it, you don't, you either fixed it or you didn't, you know? But there are so many other domains that could be very that needs to have a lot of balance or judgment call. Where did you spend, like, how did you prioritize your time in terms of those groups?
I think it depended on the day. I mean, and I don't mean that to be, trite, because, the prioritization goes up and down on all of these things. If I were to think about on average over an 8-year period, I would bet, for my personal time, the security monitoring and incident response or SOC stuff, I mean, I just don't know how as a CISO, you're not going to have a lot of time spent on there is you're just talking through, "Hey, we see something interesting here, and what do we think? And do we need to communicate this with somebody?" Right? That mean, obviously, you're always going to be on alert for any incidents going on in your company. And then the security engineering, which because I include in that the strategic roadmap and alignment with
Mhm.
standards, and that's something the CISO obviously needs to be putting a lot of their time and attention on. So those are a couple that come to mind. And and that really matches with I mean, this is, again, just kind of a tangent comment, but if you're talking about, like, presenting to your board, what are 2 of the things that are probably most important to be keeping in front of them? Your
Yeah.
significant security incidents and the maturity of your security program.
Well, I think we should lead to that. I think that goes into like in terms of like developing your cybersecurity program and teams, things that you should be really focusing on before a crisis hit. Because in the nature of cybersecurity role, a big protect aspect is like, keeping the lights on, and if there's anything that goes wrong before the crisis, we should be prepared for all of that.
Well, one thing I think about as far as things to be doing as a CISO in between crises is building relationships with the executives and people in the business, right? Because when I was in audit, I used to say an audit should be an occasional event in an ongoing relationship, right? You shouldn't just be swooping in to an organization with a bunch of leaders and people you've never talked to doing an audit, throwing them an audit report and swooping back out, right? They should already know you, should already have a relationship. And I kind of look at, security the same way. Uh, you know, uh, Security incidents should just be an occasional event in an ongoing relationship with your business leaders. They shouldn't only hear from us when there's a crisis. We need to use the time in between crises to build relationships and get guidance from the business on the security program. And I'm a very tactical person, so I like to put structure around things. And so I think it's important to have some sort of cybersecurity governance structure at the company so that you have a regular forum to talk with business leaders about what's going on in the world of security and get their input, which then feeds into your security priorities. And I liked the concept of having like at least one rep from each business unit, each support entity, so the whole company is covered. Maybe you have multiple layers where you say, "Hey, we've got a working team with maybe some of the leaders from the organizations that aren't at the very top level, and then maybe less often you meet with the top level leaders from each organization altogether." But having some kind of structure like that, I found was critical to maintaining those business relationships, helping our leaders understand the security program, the threats we're seeing, and getting their input into our program.
Yeah. And I feel like a lot of times crisis can be small or large, and a lot of small crises can result in a really big crisis. But when you have that relationship and those dialogues are happening, you can react to small stuff a lot easier than big stuff. And you're getting all these blind spot information that you may not otherwise have.
Yeah, I completely agree. Very, very well said. And and I think the transparency and communication about incidents is important too. And especially with those, uh, if you have some kind of cybersecurity governance structure where you've said, "Hey, we're going to be meeting with you regularly, help you, help you stay up to date on what's going on, and get your input, et cetera." I think it's important to be very transparent. Hey, here's the things that we've seen. Here's what's going on. Here's what we're doing about it. And because it really does build that credibility and confidence. I've seen organizations who have done the opposite, or I've talked with people who, at companies where they maybe had some big security incident and, it was something that was fairly visible. Like maybe they had to make every employee change their password, or something where people knew something was
Yeah.
happening, and the security team just gave evasive stories even to the leaders of the company. And boy, that really erodes trust. But it also is counterproductive because maybe you're trying not to communicate that something really bad happened, but
Yeah.
if something really bad happened, especially it's important for especially your leaders to understand it, because if they understand it, they're going to support you in improving security at the company, and it's going to give you backing for why maybe you need to make some changes. And if you're not communicating that, and then you're asking for a budget, well, they might not understand why you need that.
Yeah, absolutely. And like budget don't just appear out of the moon, right? From a line item.
Right.
You
Yep.
know, the numbers are shipped around, everyone's giving and taking, and there's all these dynamic moving parts when it comes to budget and where it gets into security. So I think that's extremely important for CISOs to realize, right? Like it's not because you don't have a budget, it's because you haven't gained enough support for that budget.
Yes, exactly. Very well said.
And I also think that, like, is this conversation is to me is so meaningful what you just said, because I have been in conversations where CISO walk the hallway and all the other leadership team member avoid them because they don't understand how to communicate with the CISO, right? Like, oh, he's coming and he's gonna give me bad news.
Yes. Yes, exactly. That goes back to a security incident should just be an occasional event in the ongoing relationship. If they only hear from you when there's something really bad happening, or when you're coming to like put a big rejected stamp on whatever they're asking to do because you don't want to approve anything that has any security risk. Yeah, people then just avoid you, and then you're not gonna have a seat at the table.
Definitely. For sure, for sure. And I think I also want to talk about the humility of a CISO, right? I think it's not realistic for CISOs to know the business to the depth of the business and to not be shy to ask like dumb questions and really learn from the business leaders.
I completely agree, and it goes back to eh, you know I talked earlier about like having some kind of governance structure, what have you. All of us, our success, whatever our job is, it's all about relationships, right? None of us are successful on our own. And so eh, leveraging those relationships. So for me, if I have some kind of governance structure where I've got these kind of designated people, that's a easiest place for me to go and ask questions and say, "Hey, I'm not totally understanding this. You're the expert, right? I've got expertise in security. You're the expert on this business, business unit or product or what have you. I'm trying to make sure I understand, how what we're wanting to do impacts your product, your business unit. Help me understand." People love that, right? And people are going to be very happy to have that conversation with you. And no one expects you to know everything about what's going on in the business, but they do expect you to have some business savviness and ask questions when you don't know.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think there are different events that happen through time for you to take opportunity to learn about the business, like new product launches, going into new market. Like now, like TI is going into the data center world because of AI, right? Like all of these are like new things that everyone is experiencing. So there is no prior expectation for anyone to be an expert.
Yeah, it's a great point.
So, and the other opportunity of event is like when you join a new company, there's no time better than the first 90 days to just really immerse yourself to learn about the business.
Yes, absolutely. And that's the case anytime you go into a new job, right? Especially a leadership role, whether you're transferring within your own company or going to a new company. Boy, that's the time because you're going to be given a lot of grace during those first 90 to 180 days. So take advantage of it.
Absolutely. Take a lot of advantage of it and soak it up. So, you've talked a lot about process and building the right team and culture. And I think that like part of like leading in a mature organization in a Fortune 500 environment when your scope is global and so big, and the incidents that you see could be very complex and unique. I like to like sector this into like leading at scale. You know, there's not a lot of Fortune 500 companies out there. So I like to kind of, you know, hear from you about some of the highlights of like leading at scale. What does that mean? Like when you're tackle with very unique problems.
Well, one of the things, and I'm not sure if this is where you're going with the question, so we can redirect, but when you're talking about scale, we'd already been talking about like cyber incidents and things like that, and the threats, and you're talking about working with executives. And one of the places my head goes is, okay, if with the scale of what we're dealing with in a Fortune 500 company, how do we determine what is deserving of executive attention? Because there's obviously constant security events, right? And you're not
Yeah.
gonna be escalating everything. And so I I said earlier, I'm a very tactical person. So I love playbooks, things that keep us from having to just constantly be figuring things out on the fly. And when it comes to things like security events, I think that's where playbooks help because I think we should have playbooks that have classification schemes, right, based on impact of an issue. And that scheme should consider, loss of confidential information, theft of financial assets, disruption of operations, regulatory compliance issues. You should consider all those. And then what does like a level one event look like in each of those categories, for your company? And then the playbook, should then help guide you on, okay, well, this kind of meets the definition of a level one incident. And that means, we've got this escalation and communication path, which might go up to your senior leaders, but also feeds into what you share with like your cybersecurity governance structure. If you have one of, okay, we're going to maybe share all of our level one incidents. So I think having playbooks, helps with managing scale with those sorts of incidents. But I think we also have to have discernment because a playbook can help give us guidance, but it's not gonna tell us everything. For example, like if there's a disruption that's impacting employees or operations and senior leaders are going to have some awareness of it, and if for some reason it doesn't match your definition of a level one event, if they're gonna be wondering what's happening, well then you need to you need to communicate. Just like if there's something making major headlines in the security world and they're going to be reading about it in the Wall Street Journal, even if it doesn't impact your company, you better communicate something. I mean, like SolarWinds is a great example of, okay, maybe your company doesn't even use a SolarWinds product. You know, I'm talking about that incident from a few years ago, right? Maybe your company doesn't use it, and so you're like, this doesn't matter to us, but all your executives are scared or worried because they're reading about this. So you better communicate something. So, your playbook's gonna give you guidance, but you also have to use discernment, and I'm a big believer in being proactive, right? Don't wait to be asked, because when you're proactive, it builds confidence, that you're on top of things. If you're waiting for people to reach out to you and say, "Hey, does this impact us?" or "What's going on with this?" Well, they're gonna have less confidence. They're like, "Well, I had to ask in order to get the update."
Yeah, that's true. And so, do you find that like prioritizing and communicating with your team, your peers, your executive leadership team versus the board, there's like different levels of layers and what you communicate, I guess, and how? Are there like differences?
I think there's communi I think there's what you communicate during an incident, right? And that is going to, again, should follow your playbook, but that's going to probably be a very maybe specific escalation path. And then you've got what you communicate afterwards. Again, that's where you're probably going to go broader. And this is, hey, this, to executive leadership, maybe the board of this is what happened and lessons learned. Now, your question about, you know, what do you communicate to the board versus executive leaders versus peers? I think for sure there's differences, right? Not that you're trying to communicate, not that you're trying to obfuscate anything, but depending on the level of leader, you're probably going to communicate less details, right? The leader that is going to be most directly responsible for the area that maybe they had an issue, you're probably going to give a lot more details than the board. So, hopefully any leader knows you got to use discernment on what level of detail is going to be appropriate for that particular level of leadership. But yeah, go back to your question. I think during an incident, you should have a playbook that tells you who you need to involve. And after an incident, that's when you think, okay, who else is going to be interested in understanding and seeing kind of a little bit about the postmortem of what happened, what does that tell us about our organization and things we might want to do and what our plans are to be stronger going forward.
And it sounds to me that like working with leadership is also very much a relationship thing because some board member might want details, some don't. And that goes the same with anyone you're communicating to, right?
I think that is a really, really valid and good point. And I talked earlier about it. Our success is going to be all about relationships. And part of that is, yeah, adjusting what you say to different people based on what you know about their personality. Some people want a lot of detail. Some people, their eyes are going to glaze over if you give them a lot of details. So, yeah, it's really good to know that. Just like as a leader, I believe we should adjust our leadership style based on each employee and what works best for them. I think too many leaders have the perspective of, well, I'm the leader, everyone should adjust to me. It's the opposite, right? I should understand how each employee enjoys, let me back up. What does each employee respond best to as far as communication style and that sort of thing? And let me adjust my style to something that is going to work best for that employee.
I thank you for pointing that out because I didn't I learned this throughout my career that when we communicate to the listener, right? And it's not how we talk, it's how can we get our message to that person who we're communicating to. So that's such a great point. And another leadership skill that it's not only enough to be a good listener, right? But really understand how to communicate effectively.
Yeah.
So I like to like sector into where you are, like what you're doing today, because I remember when I left TI, you had published this IT auditing book. And one of the biggest takeaway, and I still remember this today, consultative, like internal audit, like basically culture, right? Like there's internal audit team that function like a stick, or you could be consultative to the organization and be more collaborative and more, productive in terms of moving the company forward with controls and things like that. So you have gone beyond those books and like share with us what you're up to today and what's your latest passion.
Well, no, thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, that IT auditing book, that actually it's got a very exciting title. It's IT auditing using controls to protect information assets. I mean, it's just something you wanna, it's a total page turner, right? But, it 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 is exactly what you said. We tried to really talk about what makes an effective internal audit function, and all those kinds of things that you mentioned are included in there, partnership and that sort of thing. But also has a lot of how to audit different technologies, different topics, different processes. And we've done 3 editions for it for McGraw-Hill, and it's because I didn't think anything like that existed, at the time that we put it out because there were checklists, but nothing that really enabled the people to audit. And I feel like a checklist doesn't help unless you understand why you're performing each of those steps. What risk are you trying to address, and then how you would go about doing that. So we have those introductory chapters on, you know, what does good auditing look like, but then have very specific chapters on how to audit Unix and Windows servers and cybersecurity programs, et cetera, with those kind of what do you do, why do you do it, how do you do it for each audit step. But you ask kind of what my, I guess, passion is. Have a second book that came out about a year and a half ago that really is kind of near to my heart right now and was a passion project. It was called High Impact at Low Decibels. And the subtitle kind of explains what it's about. It's how anxiety-filled introverts and others can thrive in the workplace. Because I'm an anxiety-filled introvert, and the whole origin of this and how it came about was I was on a flight to India for a business trip, And when you're on those long flights, there's only so many movies you can watch, and sometimes you actually have some quiet time and you start reflecting. And I started thinking about the fact that I had a lot more career behind me and ahead of me, and started thinking about, well, what do I know now that I wish I knew then that might be helpful to others? And I centered on the fact that I don't think I matched the classic success profile for the corporate world, but I was able to have a very successful career, made it to the rings of executive leadership in a Fortune 500 company and all that. And what I mean by that is I think, okay, so I was a leader, and this book isn't just for leaders, but I was a leader. And, for me, when I think of a leader, I think, well, it should be like a Captain Kirk type, right? Someone who's really bold and decisive and confident and really good with people. And if I look at myself, I'm probably more like, Neville Longbottom or Eeyore is my more self-image because I'm an extreme introvert. I'm like 93, 94% on the introvert scale of Myers-Briggs, social anxiety, imposter syndrome, low self-esteem, all that stuff. It doesn't seem to fit the classic profile of a leader. And none of that's a complaint. It's just how I was wired. But I think those traits actually helped me be successful. I just had to figure out a way to keep them from derailing me. And so the book is sort of centered around this theme of, yeah, everyone has internal struggles, right? It's easy to look at a successful person and think, well, I couldn't do what that person's doing because they don't have to deal with the things that I do. But that's not true because everyone has their own hangups. The key is not to put artificial limits on ourselves because of them, but be aware of them, mitigate them so that they're not derailers, and then turn them into an advantage. But like I've said earlier, I'm a very tactical person. I like to be practical. I'm not big into motivational speaker slogans. So what I did with the book was try to tackle specific topics like things like how to succeed as an extreme introvert with social anxiety in a world that seems to be built for extroverts, how to overcome imposter syndrome and an inferiority complex, how to speak up in big meetings despite a lack of self-confidence. So there's multiple topics like that. And with each topic, what what I did is I had this framework of wish versus reality. So what do I wish? What do I want things to be like? And what are they like? And there's usually a gap, but then mitigation steps, specific things that I think I can do or that I have done to bridge the gap between that wish and reality, and then how that ends up turning that area into a strength. If 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 we have time, I could walk through an example if that you think that'd be helpful.
I think that would be great. I think that as you're talking, some of the things that I'm thinking about is how timely this topic is in terms of really knowing yourself and your personality trait and how you can be a good leader from any background because I think a lot of it has to do with our current times and a lot of research that is around our relationship attachment style and theories and all that are in a lot of different podcasts nowadays with relationship. But in our professional life, it's no different either. And I feel like you're kind of putting that into clarity. So I would love to hear an example.
Yeah, thanks, and I appreciate those comments, and I agree also with what you said at first, which is it's not just one profile of, who's gonna be a successful leader or individual contributor or what have you, and yeah, they come from all walks of life and, you know, they don't have to be extroverts, right? They there's value in that diversity of experience, and that's something I really tried to hit on in the book. And so, an example of one of the chapters, which is about, again, succeeding as an extreme introvert, with social anxiety in a world built for extroverts. If I look at that framework of wish versus reality, so my wish is I want to have strong relationships, strong connections with people. One, because I know it's good for me personally, but also it's critical for business success. Like I said earlier, it's all about relationships. None of us are successful on our own. All of us are going to have strong relationships, and all of us are going to need help from others to do our jobs and to advance in our careers. So, firm wish, want to have strong relationships and connections. But the reality for me, well, interactions are stressful for me and they wear me down. It goes into the whole difference between introverts and extroverts. I think most people know introvert versus extrovert doesn't have anything to do with whether you have good social skills or whether you like people, it has to do with where you get your energy from. And introverts get their energy from alone time. And as an extreme introvert, my battery gets drained very quickly by social interactions, even if I really like the person and am enjoying it. So that's part of the reality for me. Also, this whole social anxiety thing where, spontaneous social events can lead to a panic attack for me. Somebody coming by my office at 11:30 and saying, "Hey, do you want to go to lunch?" That's actually super stressful for me because I'm not prepared. I'm not mentally prepared for social interaction. Now, somebody putting lunch tomorrow on my calendar, that's totally cool because I can prepare for it. And then my natural inclination is to want to be alone. And it doesn't mean I don't love my friends and my family and being around people, but my natural default is seek alone time because, again, that's what's most peaceful and energizing for me. So I found there's really no limit to the amount of alone time that I can enjoy. So what that means is, from a business standpoint, I'm never going to just spontaneously be like, well, hey, let me get up from my desk and go, go around and talk with my team or uh, uh, chat with my peer or what have you, because instead I'm going to be like, oh, I've got 10 minutes to myself. I'm going to catch up on email. And so, being an extreme introvert who seeks a lot of alone time and who, can panic over social interactions was not super helpful in fulfilling that wish to build relationships and connections with people. So I had to figure out, how do I mitigate that? And for me, I realized a while back that I can leverage one of my strengths. One of my strengths is I'm super organized and task oriented. So if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. So I thought, well, I can turn relationship building into a task. And I started, a long time ago, every time I'd go into a new job, first thing I would do, not the first thing, but one of the first things I would do is make a list of who are the people that I need to have good relationships with in order to do this job well. And that include obviously my boss, my peers, the team that reports to me, our major stakeholders. So I'd have that list, and for each one, develop a process for how do I build and maintain those relationships. And it's not rocket science. A lot of it's like, okay, I'm going to have, a weekly one-on-one with this person, and then a monthly one-on-one with this person, and have lunch with this person every month. I'll have periodic roundtables with subsets of my team from 10 to 11 a.m. every Wednesday. I'll put on my calendar management by walking around time because I know I'm not going to do that naturally. So let me just put it on my calendar. This time from here to here, I'm gonna get up and walk around and check in on people and it could just be chit chat, but whatever, just building relationships, maybe get some status on things. But since I'm very structured, I can mitigate my inclination to be alone by turning it into a task. And there's multiple other things that I cover in the book that are additional mitigation steps, but that's just one example. But then that actually turned into a strength because once I got out of my own way and mitigated my natural tendency to maximize alone time, well, that intentional focus on and investment in relationships resulted in relationship building actually being one of my strengths. And, in case anyone's listening saying, well, gosh, does that make it phony that you had to force it? I mean, I think it's the opposite. The fact that I was so intentional about it shows how much I value those relationships because they were important enough to me that I was willing to mitigate my default nature. But anyway, that's just one example. The book provides specific ideas kind of for other topics that I mentioned, and things like fear of public speaking, imposter syndrome. Anyway, there's a number of chapters, but the idea was to provide actionable ideas. And the idea was that if you deal with some of these same things, you can directly apply these ideas. If you have other challenges, these ideas can hopefully spur ideas that work for you that you come up with for what your specific challenges are. And then I'll wrap the book up with providing ideas for things like how to set healthy boundaries at work to protect your mental health and how to develop your own personal toolkit for dealing with stress relief. Excuse me, developing your own personal toolkit of stress relief techniques that we all can use because work is stressful.
Thank you. I'm now super inspired to read this book as well because I can relate to so many things that you just said.
Well, good.
And I really feel like I missed out on all your hallway conversations and for reaching out all these years. And I feel like so spot on. I think these growth professionally that you're talking about is it's also life relationships, right? And so many times we come into an organization with various different backgrounds of upbringing and culture, that it does take time and growth for us to get to a high performing team.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you so much, Mike. I had a great conversation with you, and I will make sure that everyone knows how to contact you through LinkedIn. Is that the best way to contact you if they need to reach out?
That is the best way. I'm on LinkedIn and, yeah, happy for people to reach out to me.
That's awesome because, I know I will be reaching out to you regularly for mentoring
Thank you.
and growth, but I really appreciate this talk. I really hope and I can't wait to hear all the comments and the feedback we're getting out of it. And I'm sure, there will be a future talk in another topic. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Lily. It was really fun having the conversation. It was great to talk with you, and I really appreciate that all that you do for the security community.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. Mike Schiller's work reminds us that leadership is both technical and deeply human. Thank you so much for listening to All About Risk. Until next time.